The wind cut across the plain like a blade, hissing through the cracks of the sod house and lifting dry snow into the air. It had been falling for hours, slow at first, then heavier, until the world beyond the small windows vanished altogether. A single lantern glowed dimly inside, throwing weak light across the wooden floor, where two children sat huddled under a wool blanket, eyes wide and silent. Their mother stood at the stove, shoulders hunched, lips cracked, stirring a pot of thin broth with hands that trembled more from exhaustion than cold. The woodpile was nearly gone. Only 3 logs left, maybe 4 if she split the last one in half. She'd been counting every hour, every spark, every ounce of strength. The night would be long and the wind showed no sign of mercy. Mabel Harper had not cried since the funeral, but tonight something inside her threatened to give. The storm clawed at the roof like some wild thing. The children flinched at each groan of timber. Ruth, the younger, clung to her brother and whispered questions Mabel couldn't answer. Would the wind blow them away? Would Papa come back from the snow? Could they sleep in her bed just this once? She did not answer. She couldn't. Her throat was tight, like her own voice had frozen somewhere deep inside. Outside, the barn door banged open again, swinging on one hinge. She'd tied it shut with wire, but the storm had torn that away. The horse was gone, run off or dead, she didn't know. It hardly mattered now. She moved the pot from the flame and poured out 3 cups. The broth was bitter and thin as memory, but the children drank without complaint. She'd told them there'd be more in the morning. That was a lie. Tomorrow there would be nothing but wind and whiteness. When they were done, she pulled the children close and wrapped the blanket around all 3 of them. They sat there on the floor by the dying stove in a silence deeper than grief. Her husband's coat still hung by the door, stiff with old blood. She hadn't moved it, couldn't bring herself to. It was the only part of him left. That and the dirt-covered shovel still propped on the porch. She'd buried him herself, dug until her arms gave out. She'd kept the children inside, singing hymns off-key while she worked. The pain didn't feel sharp anymore. It just sat inside her like a weight. Heavy, unchanging. The kind of sorrow that didn't scream but whispered day after day until you forgot what joy sounded like. And yet she kept breathing, kept waking, kept stirring broth with bones picked clean. She didn't know why. The lantern flickered, the oil nearly gone. Her fingers brushed the children's hair. They were asleep now, both of them, one on each side. Their faces looked peaceful, innocent. They didn't understand what was coming. They didn't know how long cold could last. Mabel leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Somewhere out in that white nothingness, past the broken barn and the fields buried deep beneath snow, was the road. And beyond that, a town. Maybe 15 miles, maybe 20. Too far to walk with children. Maybe even too far to walk alone. But if she waited, they would die here. The fire would go out. The cold would find them. A sound, distant, faint, almost imagined. Hoofbeats. She froze, waited. There it was again. A slow, deliberate clop of hooves against hardened snow. Louder now. Closer. It could have been the wind playing tricks. But her body knew the sound before her mind could catch up. She stood, blanket falling from her shoulders, heart pounding. She moved to the door, pulled it open with both hands, and was met with a blast of snow that stole the breath from her lungs. She stepped outside anyway, barefoot, coatless, blinking against the white. A dark shape emerged through the storm. A man on horseback, wrapped in a heavy duster, his head down, reins slack in one hand. A second horse followed behind, laden with supplies. He saw her and pulled up. They stared at each other, 2 figures carved from the same wind-beaten stone. He looked, half-frozen eyes, sunken beard crusted with ice. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. Finally he dismounted, walked slowly through the snow toward her. When he reached the porch, He nodded toward the house. Fire's still going. She nodded once. Then I'll trade you a sack of flour and some beans for 10 minutes by it. She stepped aside. No words. Just opened the door wider, letting in the storm and the stranger. The stranger stamped the snow from his boots and stepped inside, slow and quiet, like he was entering a church. The children didn't wake. The fire had dimmed to embers, but it still gave off a faint glow. He stood there for a moment, letting the warmth touch him, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Mabel shut the door behind him. Her nightdress clung to her, soaked from the snow. She reached for her shawl and pulled it tight around her shoulders. The man set down his pack and stripped off his coat, revealing a lean frame under a worn shirt patched at the elbows. He crouched by the stove, rubbing his hands over the flame. "Name's Eli," he said, voice low, gravel thick. "Eli Cade." She said nothing, just watched him. Took note of the worn leather gloves, the iron ring on his right hand, the faint limp when he shifted his weight. After a long silence, she answered, "Mabel." He looked over his shoulder, nodded. "Yours?" She followed his glance to the children. "Yes. Yours alone now." Her jaw clenched. She looked away but nodded once. He didn't press, just turned back to the stove and fed in a log from the few she'd saved. "That your only stack?" She hesitated. "It'll last the night," she said. He gave her a look, one brow raised. Not disbelief exactly, more like he knew what a lie sounded like when it was told with good reason. "Got a sled," he said. "Left the rest of the wood by the ridge. Took the horses down light so I could make it fast." Her eyes flicked to the window. She couldn't see a thing beyond the frost-covered glass. "You came through the passage." He nodded. "You're either brave," she said quietly, "or foolish." "Maybe both," he said. "Snow cut off my trail. Saw your chimney smoking. Figured a roof's better than a grave." Mabel poured the last of the hot water into a tin cup and handed it to him. He took it, nodding his thanks, and drank slow. "I can help with the wood come morning," he said. "If you'll have it." She crossed her arms. "And what do you want for it?" He didn't answer at first, just looked into the fire. Rest, warmth, and maybe a reason to keep moving. That struck her harder than she expected. The way he said it, quiet, uncertain, like a man who'd lost more than he could name. Mabel sat on the edge of the bed, keeping one hand on Ruth's back. The little girl stirred in her sleep and pressed closer. Outside, the wind kept howling. "You got a family?" she asked. Eli stared into the stove. "Had one. Back in Missouri. Land claim didn't hold. Wife didn't wait. Took the boys and left for her sisters. Haven't seen 'em in 3 years. Mabel didn't speak. The silence stretched between them. Not heavy, not awkward. Just real. Two people with nothing to offer but truth. "I buried my husband 4 weeks ago," she said. "I figured." She watched him for a while. The way his shoulders sagged a little once he'd had warmth. The way he kept glancing at the children without trying to look like he was. "You can stay till the storm breaks," she said at last. "But after that—" "I'll be gone," he said. She nodded. He lay down near the stove, wrapping himself in his coat, his back to the door. She stayed where she was, between him and the children, the old rifle still leaning behind the woodbox. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But something in her, the part that hadn't fully gone numb, didn't fear him either. Outside, the wind kept tearing across the plains. But inside, for the first time in days, the cold didn't feel like it would kill them. The storm held for 2 more days. Snow heaped against the walls of the sod house, sealing them in so tight the daylight came in faint and blue through the windows. Ice crept along the corners of the panes like a spreading illness. The stove never went out, though the logs burned quick and low, and Mabel rationed each one like it was breath. Eli kept his word. At first light he rose without being asked, shoveled the drift away from the door, and walked out into the white with a rope over his shoulder. He came back after an hour dragging a small sled stacked with cut wood and a bundle of dried meat wrapped in burlap. Didn't say a word. Just shook off the snow and went to stacking the logs neatly by the stove. He moved like a man used to work. Not hurried, not lazy, just steady. That steadiness felt strange in the house, like something foreign. Her husband had been full of plans and fire, but Eli didn't speak unless he had to. He fixed the barn door without comment, used old nails pulled from the broken fence. He helped boil snow for water, cleared the chimney cap when it clogged with soot, and once when Ruth began to cough from the cold, he sat by her bed and hummed some tune so low and slow it almost sounded like wind. Mabel watched it all with careful eyes. She didn't ask where he'd come from before Missouri. She didn't ask why he'd come west alone or why he carried a small leather book he never opened when anyone was looking. But when the children were asleep and the storm moaned like grief around them, she'd catch him staring into the fire with a look that mirrored her own. She didn't trust it, not yet, but she understood it. The second evening, as the wind began to soften, Eli stood at the window, arms folded, watching the storm ease its grip on the plains. He spoke without turning. "You ever think of leaving?" Mabel stirred the pot on the stove. This time the broth had meat in it. Just a little, but enough to taste. "No," she said. "Not even when he passed." She shook her head. This land was his dream. He broke his back for it. I owe him that much. Eli nodded slowly, the kind of nod a man gives when he knows the weight of promises made to the dead. "I stayed once," he said, "for pride, for memory. It cost me near everything." She didn't answer, just ladled stew into tin bowls and passed one to him. They ate in silence, the fire crackling low between them. The children slept curled up together, their breathing soft and slow. When the bowls were empty, he set his aside and leaned back. "You got grit," he said quietly. "I've seen folks fall apart with less. I don't have the luxury of falling apart. Still, you could have laid down and let the cold take you. But you didn't." She looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't young, not anymore. His face was weather-worn, marked by sun and years and whatever had come before. But there was a gentleness beneath it all, buried under layers of silence and winter. Not softness, something else. Endurance. She let out a slow breath. "You say you're leaving when the storm breaks." He met her eyes. "That's the plan. You planning on keeping it?" He looked away. "I don't know." The wind rattled the shutters one last time, then died into a hush. In the stillness, the world felt different, less cruel, or maybe just less loud. Mabel rose, tucked the children in tighter, then crossed the room and sat near the fire opposite him. "There's a lot still broke out here," she said. "Fences down, livestock scattered. My hands ain't enough." "I got two," he said. They sat there in silence, not as strangers anymore, but not yet anything else. And when the morning came, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in 5 days, laying a pale gold light across the snow, and Eli didn't pack his things. By mid-morning, the snow had begun to melt in patches, curling away from fence posts and low stones. The sky hung pale and high, washed clean by the storm. The plains looked untouched, as if God himself had dragged a white sheet over the land to start fresh. In that quiet, in the stillness that followed so many days of howling wind, Mabel stood on the porch with her arms crossed, watching Eli dig out the barn path. His coat flapped behind him. Each shovel full of snow landed with a wet thump. He worked without needing direction, as if the doing of things gave him purpose. There was no pretense to it, no manly show. Just movement, the kind that said he'd done hard work long before she ever laid eyes on him. The children came out barefoot, giggling, their feet wrapped in rags. Mabel scolded them gently and called them back in, but they danced in the snow anyway, drunk on the sudden blue sky and the smell of wood smoke. Ruth picked up a fistful of snow, packed it tight, then let it fall apart in her hands. Luke found a stick and pretended it was a sword, slashing at wind and shadow. Eli leaned on his shovel and watched them for a moment. "Good kids," he said when Mabel joined him. "They're all I've got." "You reckon they remember him?" "Some parts. His voice. The way he smelled after branding season. Luke asks about him more than Ruth." Ellie nodded and looked toward the barn. "I could patch that roof better if you've got nails and boards." "I've got nails," she said. "Boards might take creativity." He smiled, small, quick, gone in a blink, but it was the first time she'd seen anything near warmth cross his face without shadow behind it. "Creativity I can manage," he said. They worked together through the day. She fetched tools while he cut broken slats into something usable. She mended a fence while he drove stakes. The rhythm of shared labor settled between them, a quiet language neither of them had spoken in a long time. No questions. No explanations. Just need and reply. That night, when the children were asleep and the house glowed soft with firelight, Mabel poured 2 cups of coffee, black and sharp. She handed one to Eli and sat down across from him at the small table. "I should ask what you plan to do come spring." He looked into his cup. "Hadn't thought that far. You came through the pass without much on you. Don't seem like a man with roots anywhere." "No, not for a long time. And if I asked you to stay—" He looked up. His eyes didn't flinch, but they didn't answer right away either. "Depends on what you're asking for." She shrugged slightly. "Help. Company. An extra pair of hands that knows how to swing a hammer. Not a husband." "Not yet." He leaned back, his fingers loose around the tin cup. "I could do that," he said. "Long as I'm wanted. You don't strike me as the type to stay where he's not." "No," he agreed. "That's gotten me into trouble more than once." They sat quiet a while, listening to the wind outside shift from winter's teeth to spring's whisper. The house didn't groan anymore. The cold no longer bit like it had before. Eli stretched his arms and walked to the window. "You'll need seed come thaw," he said, "and oil for the plow. I know a man near Fairgrove who owes me $2 and a promise. I could ride out, see if it still holds." Mabel tilted her head. "You'd come back?" He met her eyes. "I think so." She rose and stepped toward the stove, adding another log, her hand steady for the first time in weeks. "Then I'll keep your coffee warm." And she meant it. If this story echoes in your heart, subscribe and let the next one find you too. By the time Eli rode out for Fairgrove, the snow had shrunk to crusted edges along the shadowed parts of the field. The ground was still too wet to plow, but patches of brown earth had begun to show like a promise trying to break through. Mabel stood beside the barn with Ruth on her hip, watching the dark shape of Eli and the mare fade into the pale distance. He'd left at dawn with a coil of rope, a sack of dried meat, and her husband's old rifle. She'd offered it without ceremony, and he'd taken it the same way. No thanks. No gesture. Just a nod that said, "I'll carry this now." For the next 2 days the house felt strange again. Quieter. Not empty exactly, but thinner, like it had been stretched. She moved through it with a kind of caution, as if the stillness might crack. The children asked when he'd return. She said she didn't know, but in truth she'd already begun listening for hooves again, even before night fell. On the 3rd evening, just as the sky turned the color of cooled ash, she saw him coming. He rode slow, saddle low, under the weight of a small sack strapped behind him. When he dismounted, he handed it to her with little more than a grunt. She opened it at the table, seed a jar of oil, 2 new nails wrapped in cloth, and a folded piece of paper with a name she didn't recognize scrawled across the top. "That man in Fairgrove," he said. "He's dead. But his widow runs the feed store now. Said she remembered me." Mabel raised an eyebrow. "She charged you." "She tried. I talked her down." "You charm her." He gave her a look that could have been mistaken for amusement. "Let's say she felt sorry for me." Mabel almost smiled. Almost. She busied herself unpacking the sack while Eli took off his coat and settled back into the familiar corner of the room like he hadn't ever left it. That night she cooked with more than bone and flour. A bit of salt, some lard, beans, and something close to flavor. The children laughed at the table loud and wild, and Ruth told Eli he snored like a bear. He didn't deny it, just shrugged and said a bear sleeps warm. After they were asleep, Mabel stood at the door watching the wind comb the prairie in long, slow waves. She didn't turn when Eli stepped beside her. "I passed a wagon on the trail," he said. "Broken wheel near the gulch. Man and his boy trying to reach Dawson Ridge before the thaw." "Did you help them?" "I did. They gave me a Bible in thanks." He handed it to her. Worn leather cover pages, thin as onion skin. She held it in both hands, the weight unfamiliar. "You, praying man?" she asked. "Used to be. Not sure who I'd be talking to now." She nodded, not out of judgment but recognition. "I buried Samuel with his Bible. Felt like stealing if I kept it." Eli looked down at the dirt under his nails, then out into the fading light. "Most of the folks I meet out here," he said, "they're running from something, or towards something they can't name." "Which were you?" He didn't answer. They stood like that for a long time. Then softly she said, "I think I'm tired of being alone." The words hung there open and unfinished. She didn't reach for him, didn't explain. Just let the truth hang there like breath in cold air. Eli didn't move either, but he didn't step away. "Me too," he said. And it wasn't a promise. Not yet. But it was a start. Spring came slow as it always did on the plains mud first, then wind, then finally green. Shoots of grass pushed through the thawed soil like stubborn hope. The air still held a bite, but the sun rose earlier each morning and the chickens began laying again without needing coaxing. Mabel moved through the days with sleeves rolled and skirts pinned up. Her hands stayed busy digging, planting, mending, measuring. She spoke less now, not because of sorrow, but because there was finally someone else who understood what silence could mean. Eli stayed. He slept on the cot beside the stove, never asked for a bed, never pressed for more than what she offered. He fixed the roof, traded with neighbors for a second-hand plow blade, and taught Luke how to tie proper knots with calloused fingers and quiet patience. Ruth followed him like a shadow, asking questions about birds, tracks, clouds, things Mabel never had time to explain. He always answered her even when he didn't know. Made up stories about the stars. Named every stray dog they passed. At night, when the work was done, they'd sit by the stove while the children slept, cups of chicory in their hands. Sometimes they'd talk about the coming harvest. Sometimes they wouldn't speak at all. Mabel came to know his silences. The tight ones. The tired ones. The peaceful ones. One evening, as wind bent the cottonwoods and dusk settled over the land, Eli set his cup down and said, "I had a brother once. Younger. Died in a barn fire back in Arkansas. I was supposed to be watching him." Mabel didn't flinch. Just waited. "I left him for 5 minutes. Just 5. Went to see a girl who lived near the creek. By the time I came back, the whole place was smoke. He was only 8. She didn't reach for him. Didn't offer comfort. She knew better than to touch grief like that too soon." "I never told anyone the truth," he said. "Not my father. Not the girl. I just left. Kept running until no one remembered my name." Mabel's voice came low. And now, he stared into the fire. Now I want to be the kind of man who stays. She swallowed the weight of his words landing somewhere deep in her chest. She looked over at the children safe in their bed, then down at her hands red and rough and still trembling sometimes in the morning. I'm not easy to love, she said. Eli gave her a long look. That's not what I see. She didn't cry. Not then. But something in her softened. Just enough. In the weeks that followed, they fell into something like rhythm. She let him hold Ruth when she cried. He let her mend the hole in his coat without a word. They shared work and quiet and small glances that said more than they could name. But spring never came without testing what it had just begun to give. One morning a wagon rolled up the trail from the east. Mabel saw it before Eli did. A woman in a blue shawl sat high on the seat, reins in hand. Two boys in the back, both with dark hair and the same pale eyes. Mabel's heart dropped before she even heard the woman speak. I'm looking for Ellie Cade, she said. He stepped out from the barn, saw her, and froze. Caroline, he said. The woman nodded. You said if I ever needed help. I remember. The children inside stirred. Ruth peeked through the window. Mabel didn't move. She didn't speak, but her hands curled at her sides. Caroline glanced at Mabel, then back to Eli. We've got nothing left. James is gone. Drowned in the flood last year. We've been living off borrowed credit and kindness, but both have run out. I didn't know where else to go. Eli looked at the boys, then at the trail behind the wagon. Then at Mabel. His voice came rough. This is your claim now. Your home. I won't stay where I'm not wanted. Mabel held his gaze. You told me once you wanted to be a man who stays, she said. Then stay. But don't lie about who you were. Caroline stepped down from the wagon, her boots hitting the dirt with a thud. I'm not here to cause trouble, she said. I just need somewhere safe to rest. Just for a while. Mabel looked at her. At the boys. At Eli. Then she opened the door. There's room in the barn. You can take the loft. The wind rose again. But this time no one moved. That night the house held a strange hush, not from fear or grief this time, but something harder to name. Eli took his plate outside without asking. The boys, quiet and thin as fence posts, ate slowly, eyes flicking between their mother and the walls like they expected something to fall. Caroline thanked Mabel softly, folded her hands after supper, and asked if she could help with dishes. Mabel nodded, though the movement felt stiff in her body. They worked side by side at the basin, hands and water gone lukewarm. She wrote to your farm last spring, Caroline said, not looking up. Said it was returned unopened. Mabel nodded once. That sounds right. The clink of tinware. The rustle of night air slipping in through the cracks. I don't expect anything from him now, Caroline added. Not love. Not apology. Just safety. Mabel didn't answer right away. Ruth's never known a man stay longer than a season, she said. Luke still thinks his father's buried out back, even though he never came home. Caroline turned then. I'm not your enemy. Mabel studied her, this woman who bore time in the lines of her face just the same, who carried her own kind of grief like a suitcase with one handle broken. She didn't hate her. But she didn't trust her either, not yet. I'm not sure I believe in enemies anymore, Mabel said. Just people crossing paths when they shouldn't. Or maybe when they have to. Later she found Eli sitting near the barn, hat in his hands, coat open to the cold. I didn't know she'd come, he said. She looked like she didn't have much choice. No, she didn't. They sat without speaking for a while. The barn creaked softly. The stars blinked down like quiet witnesses. I told you I ran, he said. That's who I was. And now I'm trying not to. She pulled her shawl tighter. Trying, "Don't count for much if you split when it gets hard." "I'm not going," he said. "Not unless you tell me to." Mabel didn't speak. She reached over, took the hat from his hands, and set it gently in her lap. "You've got 2 boys in that loft and 2 children in my home who look at you like spring finally came early. So you better think real hard before you act like a ghost again." Eli looked at her face, taut with something halfway between shame and relief. "I don't know how to be both things," he said. "You don't have to. Just be here." In the days that followed, work became the language of healing. Eli taught the older boy Thomas to mend a gate with iron nails and steady hands. Luke followed behind them like a pup. Ruth clung to Caroline's skirts at first, then to her voice, and soon after her stories. The younger boy, Caleb, didn't speak much at all, but when Mabel found him brushing the old mare with gentle, practiced strokes, she said nothing, just handed him a bucket and let him work. Meals were quiet but fuller. Days longer but easier. The house, for all its rough edges, began to feel like something whole again. One evening, Mabel found Eli sitting on the porch steps, carving something with his knife, small, careful cuts into a piece of pine. "What's that?" she asked. He held it up. A small horse, crude but strong. A child's toy. "For Caleb," he said. "I figured he might speak again if someone listened long enough." Mabel sat beside him. The sky was turning violet, stretched thin and soft. "You never asked me what I wanted," she said. He paused. "I figured you'd tell me when you knew." She looked down at her hands. "I want roots," she said. "Not romance. Not rescue. Just something that won't blow away the first time the wind comes hard." Haley nodded. "Then let's plant something." And there, beneath the vast quiet of a prairie evening, Mabel took his hand, not out of need, not out of weakness, but because she wanted to. Summer came hard and fast, as it often did in that part of the country, days long enough to work by sun alone, heat thick enough to make shirts stick to backs before noon. The fields grew uneven, patchy in places, but alive. Beans climbed up twine stretched between fence posts, and corn peeked through rows of dry soil with a kind of shy stubbornness. Mabel tended each row like it might feed the future. Eli built a lean-to for the new wagon, then started framing a chicken coop without being asked. Caroline took over the cooking one night a week, her biscuits, nothing like Mabel's but good in their own right. The boys stopped flinching when doors slammed. Caleb said his first word nail while holding up one crooked between 2 fingers. It came out soft, almost shy, but it stuck. Evenings stretched. The children played with sticks and string while the adults sat by the edge of the porch, boots, untied hands, blistered hearts, quieter than they used to be. It wasn't simple. Nothing ever was. But it was working. One night in July, as the fireflies came out and the prairie exhaled its warm breath, Eli handed Mabel a bundle wrapped in old cloth. She opened it slowly. Inside, a carved wooden ring, smoothed and oiled. No stone. No inscription. Just the grain of pine and the mark of his hand. "I know I've got no land to offer," he said. "No name worth speaking of. But I've got 2 hands and every reason to stay." Mabel ran her thumb across the wood. It was light, warm, made from the same trees that bent in the wind behind them. "I never wanted a ring," she said, "but I'll wear this." They didn't speak vows. There was no preacher, no gathering. Just 2 people beneath the sky, the hush of a world that had learned to bend but not break. Later that summer, Luke asked if Eli was his father now. Mabel knelt beside him, brushing the dirt from his cheek. "He's not trying to take what your father was," she said. "But he's here, and he's choosing to stay. That matters too." Luke nodded. That was enough for him. By August, the barn was fuller. A few chickens. a goat Caroline had traded for sewing work. The house held more laughter than it had in years, though sorrow still lived in the corners. They didn't pretend it was gone. They just let it rest. One morning Mabel stood by the well, bucket in hand, when Caroline joined her. "He carved me a ring once," she said, not bitter, just remembering. "I lost it crossing the river when Thomas was a baby." Mabel looked at her then, offered a small smile. "Some things aren't meant to last. Others get remade." They drew water in silence, each woman lost in her own memory. Not rivals, walls, not strangers. Just two women who had survived enough to recognize the shape of the other's endurance. In the fall they harvested together. Eli and Thomas tied corn bundles while Mabel and Caroline dried beans on longboards in the sun. Caleb smiled now more often than not. Ruth sang nonsense songs as she ran between rows. Luke asked questions about maps, about where things began and where they ended. Eli started marking out the frame of a new room off the back of the house for space, he said. But Mabel saw the truth in his eyes. It was for permanence. One night after the harvest was in, and the frost had just begun to touch the edge of the windows, Mabel sat with Eli beneath a sky so clear it felt like glass. "I never thought life could begin again this late," she said. "It didn't begin," Eli answered. "It just kept going. We were the ones who turned around." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the wooden ring cool against her skin. Inside, the children slept. The stove glowed steady. The wind blew as it always would, but this time it only rattled the windows. It didn't shake the foundation. And outside, under stars older than sorrow, Mabel Harper finally felt something she hadn't in a long, long time. Home. Subscribe and see how hearts once broken can build a home again.